to the GAB Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olzak. Today, we will be speaking with Donna E. Lane, author of This Hallowed Ground, distinguished favorite in the 2022 New York City Big Book Award for Christian Fiction. Donna's work includes nonfiction and fiction Christian books, professional counseling books, and children's books. She's an adjunct professor of counseling at Mercer University and a Christian counselor. Donna specializes in trauma recovery, grief, and loss. She has 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Donna writes and lives with her husband, David, in Georgia. Congratulations, Donna, and welcome to the GAB.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Very excited to talk with you.
Thank you. So, Donna, let's just delve right into it. Without spoilers, tell us what This Hallowed Ground is about and what the meaning is behind the title.
All right. It's a book that begins in the Civil War, and the famous speech by Abraham Lincoln had the phrase "This hallowed ground" in it. But in the book, it has multiple meanings. The main character, Aidan MacAlister, followed his father into the Civil War to fight for the South, even though neither one of them believed in the cause. They felt obligated to fight for their state, and they went into the war, and as a result of fighting in the war, of course, the South lost. Aidan lost his farmland, all of his land. And the only way he could find to get his land back was to choose to go fight for the other side, meaning that he joined the Union Army and went and fought for the Union Army out west against the Native Americans. But when he was out west, he sympathized more with the Native Americans because they were just trying to defend their land in much the same way that he felt like he was trying to defend his. So This Hallowed Ground has that double entendre meaning of his land and the Native American land being hallowed to them, and how the war had stolen land from both of them.
That's a wonderful description. In fact, I've heard several people compare the story to a combination of Dances with Wolves, Gone with the Wind, and Outlander. And I would have to agree, it does definitely have all of those elements. Donna, as you said, it was a very complex time in history, the Civil War, the Reconstruction. And obviously, based on the detail in your book, you really had to delve into the Lakota tribe and literally learn everything about their history and their culture and their traditions. So what type of research did you do, and where did you start?
Well, I started with the Civil War. I had to begin at the beginning and learn everything that I could learn about every battle, every person that was involved, everything that happened in the Civil War, and how it impacted both sides in the war. And then once he moved out west, I had to look into the Indian Wars and see who all was involved in that, how many people were killed in that process, how the Union soldiers managed to deal with the Lakota tribe, all of the ins and outs of that complicated mess. And then I started looking into the Lakota culture. And fortunately, the Lakota are very open with information about their culture and about their tribe. So that made my job a good bit easier, since I had access to a lot of information. The hardest part was learning some about their language. Of course, I'm not going to pretend that I learned how to speak Lakota, because I could never do that, I don't think, without somebody tutoring me. But I was able to learn about certain phrases and certain significant words, and found it really fascinating to explore the culture of the Lakota, and how so many things that they believe, so much of their philosophy, their values, really reflect a lot of what we would call Christian values. And in fact, at one point in the story, Aidan MacAlister says that they are more Christian than the Christians. They follow it. They follow the beliefs better, even if they don't have the name of Christ before all of their beliefs. They still follow the values better than the Christians do. That was his comment. So learning about how they did weddings, how they did funerals. I mean, I had to study a lot of detail because there was a lot of events that happened during his time with the Lakota that I had to see, well, what would that have actually been like?
So it seems like that part of the research was the most difficult, but also the most interesting part for you.
It was fascinating. And part of the reason that I wanted to write the book was to highlight what happened to the Native Americans. That was actually one of my motives. So when I really got to delve into that, it was very meaningful to me.
Well, you can tell based on your writing that it was. So you've written a number of books. 15 are we at? 15 books that you've written, give or take a few?
Give or take. That's about
okay.
Right.
And they're varying genres and topics: Christianity, dystopian fiction, children's books, counseling books. This Hallowed Ground is a Christian fiction, but it's also very much a historical fiction.
Yes.
What was your inspiration for the book?
My husband and I were on a trip out west to visit Canyon Country, and we drove from like Zion to Bryce Canyon to the Grand Canyon. We drove all across the West. And during that trip, the road took us through Indian reservation. And it just, I have to say, broke my heart. And that's the best description that I could give it. Because I had never seen other than, blippets on television or something like that, I'd really never seen the conditions or the kind of land that the Native Americans were given. And I was just struck by how limited their options are, given that their land is fundamentally desert. I mean, it's kind of almost useless. And the poverty, the struggle was graphically apparent. I told my husband in the car, as I was crying in the car, I told him if I was 20 years old again, I would make my career out there at a reservation. I would go do counseling there. That's what I would choose to do. Unfortunately, I'm not 20, not even close. And so there isn't any way for me to then, turn around where I am about at retirement age to turn around and go and try to do that at this point. But then I told him, I need to write about this. I need to write what happened to these people.
And what is still happening, actually.
That's right. And
what is still happening. It's really, they're forgotten communities. The young people have so little opportunity. And unfortunately, many of them turn to drug abuse and alcohol abuse. And it's really quite tragic. So it seems that in many of your books, Donna, particularly This Hallowed Ground, there are recurring themes of sacrifice, loss, redemption. Why are these important to talk about?
Well, personally, for me, I suffered what I call a trauma. It was the death of my youngest son. He was 17 when he passed away.
Sorry.
Thank you. He had a progressive neurological disorder that he had basically from the time he was 18 months old until he passed away at 17. But his life, I would call a life of giving and sacrifice for others. He saw his purpose as being touching as many lives as he could before he went home. He was very much aware that he was dying. He was aware he was going to pass away from the time he could understand the concept. Wow. He knew that. But his maturity, his strength, his courage, and then ultimately the theme of redemption is the redemption of God of his life, that even though his life was short, I watched him live more life in that 17 years than most people live in a lifetime of 90 years. He was so full of joy, full of life, always involved in everything he could get involved in. He did things that the doctors said were impossible for him to do just because he believed he could do it. And so he never gave up or gave in. And he's sort of my hero / role model. It was Cody, which was his name. It was Cody that convinced me to start writing. Actually.
Wow.
he told me that my older son and I used to have these deep theological conversations at home. And finally, Cody said, "Would y'all please just write a book? You need to get this stuff down on paper, please."
Well, obviously he was right.
Yeah, he was very special, and still inspires people, even though he's been gone since 2007. He still inspires people today. People who knew him, even people who didn't know him, because they read about his story and they're so moved by him. So for me, the themes of loss, of course, that's very personal. And the themes of redemption that's also very personal to me.
Is there a little bit of Cody in your protagonist, Aidan or Mac?
Yes, the strength, certainly. Although Cody never struggled with his faith, he never wrestled. But I saw plenty of people around him that were wrestling with their faith because of what he was going through. They felt such deep sorrow. His siblings, they felt such deep sorrow at what he was suffering that they sometimes wrestle with their faith. But his inner peace and his connection with God. Now that part is significant in Aidan MacAlister, and it certainly reflects what I experienced from being around Cody, that he had that kind of connection where he could just ask God a question and receive an answer. He felt so connected to God and sure about his faith.
Why do you think your readers will connect with Aidan MacAlister? What is his most outstanding quality?
Well, I think you see in him the willingness to be honest with his struggle. And I think a lot of people in the church in particular struggle with being honest with their struggle, that they feel like they have to pretend that they've got it all together. And Aidan didn't do that. He by far did not pretend that he had it all together. He owned the fact that he was really having a hard time. He wrestled with God. He argued with God. He yelled at God. He was able to do all those things and yet still believe that he was beloved of God. And I think that that's something that Christian readers will connect with. I think other readers would connect with his perseverance and his willingness to put other people first, despite all of his suffering. He never became completely self-involved. If somebody else had a need, he would go after that need, even though he was having a hard time. So
I'm glad you said that, because it's not just a Christian fiction book. It's a historical fiction. So many readers across different genres and interests will connect with not only Aidan MacAlister, but the story. So Donna, when you write a book, specifically This Hallowed Ground, what is your ultimate goal?
My primary goal is to connect people to God. That's my bottom line, ultimate goal for all of my books. This Hallowed Ground, I wanted to highlight the plight of the Native Americans that I feel like don't get any press.
Yes.
Where there are many oppressed groups that get a lot of press, but they don't get any. And I felt like if I can highlight what actually happened to them and why they are in the situation they're in now, and how wonderful a culture it was, then maybe that would open some people's eyes. That was my goal with writing this particular book.
That's wonderful. So obviously you did not begin your professional career as a writer. Thanks to Cody, we have numerous books from you. What advice can you offer aspiring writers about getting started and also about the process?
The first thing I would say is just sit down and start writing. Don't try to perfect it. Don't try to make every line perfect when you first do it. Don't try to figure out what you're going to say before you say it. Just sit down and write. Just express from your heart. Let it flow out. And then once you've done that, go back and then go over it and see what needs to change, what can be cut, what needs to be added. The other thing I would tell you is find out from people who know what they're doing, the mistakes that you are probably going to make.
Good
And
advice.
see what they can help you avoid. Because one of the things we did when Hayden, my son, and I wrote the very first book that we wrote for Cody, is we didn't know anything. And we wrote it and we gave it to a publisher and they published it. And we were like clueless. There were so many things that we did wrong. We didn't even know we did wrong. So I'd say get information, learn from people who know. If you don't have contact with people who know, go to some kind of a writing conference or some groups that actually are teaching, or sign up for workshops and get the information. And then the final thing I'd say is if you're not a marketer or a person who does marketing, learn how to do marketing. Because
Great advice.
You have to do it.
You have to get the book out there. If you've put all
Yeah.
that work in, you have to get it out there.
Right. Even
For
if
sure.
you're with a big publisher, you still have to do marketing. So
For
learn how
sure.
to do it. Yeah.
So how long did a novel like This Hallowed Ground take for you to write?
That one took me 9 months.
Wow, that's not too bad considering the tremendous amount of research that you had to do. That's amazing. And I love the color. Tell me the cover. Tell me about your illustrator and how that worked.
Well, I just actually lucked in or got blessed, whichever language you want to use, with finding the illustrator through one of those websites that you can contact people, connect with them. And he was somebody that does hand-painted covers. And I said, oh, I want that. I want a hand-painted cover. I think that would be really neat. And we had just one of those relationships that it just clicked. And he seemed to understand exactly what I wanted and worked really well with me and just created the image that was in my head. He created for me. So I just got very, very fortunate, because a lot of times that's actually one of the harder things, is to get your cover exactly like you want it to be.
That's why I asked, because the cover really evokes what the book is about. And that's truly amazing. So in addition to being an award-winning author, you're also a grief and trauma counselor. And I understand that you've worked with survivors from Sandy Hook,
Yes.
as well as the earthquake in Haiti, and I'm sure many more.
Right.
How has this impacted your work as a writer?
It's helpful in being able to know the process of trauma. I know a lot about trauma, obviously, from studying it, from doing research in it, and then also from working with people who've gone through it. So the emotions that people feel during trauma, what happens when they get triggered or some traumatic event gets stirred up for them, why it happens, the complexity of their feelings, all that I'm very familiar with and aware of. So it's easier for me to describe it than it would be for somebody who was trying to guess, like, I think it might feel like this, but I mean, I know from hearing it described over and over again for the last 43 years, I know what trauma does. And so I'm able to put a lot of description into the emotions and the feelings of my characters. And I think that benefits the reader's connection with the characters. At least I hope so.
Absolutely does. So Donna, I know our listeners are eager to know what you're working on now.
I've got 2 works in progress right now. The first one is a sci-fi time travel novel.
Wow. Okay, great.
And it's pretty much done. There might be some more, tweaking that needs to be done. I usually do that process 2 or 3 times just to make sure that I'm happy with it. And then the other is a biblical study about the nature of Christ as a shepherd. And then we're looking at all of the scripture verses that mention him being a shepherd. So like the 23rd Psalm, for example, is one of the chapters. And so we're looking at all of the qualities of a shepherd and also the qualities of what it means to be a sheep, which is us.
Well, that sounds fantastic. We're really looking forward to both of those and hopefully many more to come. Lastly, Donna, how can we find out more about you?
The easiest way to find out about my books is on my website. It's thedoctorslane.com, and that's spelled out, The Doctor's Lane. And that will have not just the books and the description of the books and the awards that each one has won. It also has blog posts on things like marriage and parenting and all sorts of fun things. And then we have YouTube videos on there that go over Bible studies for different books of the Bible. So we have a little bit of everything on there. And that's the easiest way to find out and to get in touch with me as well.
Perfect. Donna, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure. Next podcast, we'll be chatting with Tobin Marks, author of Ark of the Apocalypse. This is Gabby Olzak of the GAB Talks.